1, 2, 3, 4.
Welcome back to another edition of Lay It on the Table, the Southern Board Game Podcast with the accent on Southern. As usual, I am one of your hosts, Joe Mahaffey.
And also, as usual, I'm your other host, James Engelhardt.
James,
good to see you, Joe. How you doing, man?
Good to see you, man. It's really great to be back together. I know it's been a couple of weeks. It's been more than a couple of weeks, and I just want to express my thanks to you, James, and to Kit from our last interview. A lot of our listeners don't know I've had some medical issues with my mom that has been quite distracting. She's very stable right now and all is good for where we are, but it's just made doing this podcast a little bit more difficult this summer. So occasionally we just have to take a little bit of respite, and that's what we did. But I did get the episode up this past week where we got to do Zen and the art of game accessories, I think is what I called it.
Something like that, yeah.
So, but we really appreciate Kit and the folks over at GameEnvy.net. And I got to tell you, I was at the game store yesterday, and we were doing our bi-weekly paint event, and I got to use the hobby holder. I had the Desk Wizard, and I had the Exemplar out. And boy, those tools really do make a difference when you're making your way through a couple of different paint things. And of course, that was always just a great therapeutic time over there at Carolina Tabletop Games, not a sponsor, where we meet every other week and do some painting. So that was good.
Well, they sponsor your meditation break, so you can go and paint there.
That's fair. That's very, very fair. Okay. Well, before we get started, I just want to remind everybody about Mythicon Charlotte 2023. It is going to be November 10th through the 12th in Charlotte, North Carolina at the University Hilton. You can get tickets now. They're also looking for people to do some game demonstrations. And James and I are hoping to be there, either to be wandering around and maybe doing some random podcasting stuff, or maybe we might even be enticed into demoing a game or two.
Ooh.
James knows a thing or two about games, and I think that would be a good thing for him to do. But anyway, so it's at the Hilton Charlotte University Place. You can go to tabletop events. You know what? I'm just going to put it in the show notes. It's going to be so much easier than to read this URL. They need a tiny URL for this. But anyway, but our good friends over there at Mythicon, Tuna and his wife, whose name still escapes me, even though somebody told it to me yesterday, so I would no longer do this. And I'm just going to have to fix that. So that's apologies from me on that. Okay, so today we don't have a guest. We've got a few that we've got in the works for coming up. But we're just going to get back to some games and sort of things that are going on. And I think it's always appropriate to start with the news and notes. And I think there's been a lot going on here lately with, this is the time of year with the big conventions. And so, James, I think you've got a few things in here that you want to jump in on. So why don't you start talking about Spiel?
Yeah. So Essen Spiel 2023 is coming up. And the notes here are that the Essen game list is live on BGG. It's like right at the top. You can go and see it. Last time I checked, they had 425 games and expansions so far. That's going to keep changing pretty much daily up until it shows, then up until the show itself. They have a nice filterable list there too, so you can pick different things. You can sort by base games or by expansions. You can set your priority like you can do with other games, right? So must have, stay away, buy now, whatever. You can sort by price point, publishers, all this kind of stuff. So it's a super useful, and I mean, it's just, this is the show where the most board games get, sort of released into the world. So this is the one to sort of pay attention to, even if you're not making it over to Germany yourself, just to see what's happening with games coming up. Yeah.
It's interesting because I think, we talk about this being the golden age of board games, and it was really driven from the Europeans. This is something that is a hobby that's really exploded because of, Europe being first, which sometimes in our culture is an unusual thing, at least for our generation. Previous generations, not so much. And so I think that's really cool. But I was noticing, I can't remember exactly which one it was, but when we get down to the Kickstarter thing, I noticed that one of the options with the Kickstarter you could back was picking up at Essen Spiel.
Yep.
And I thought, okay, that's to me, I think that's probably the premier board game show in the world.
Oh yeah.
And so I think that's very cool. So just out of curiosity, you went through the list. You've been at this a lot longer than I have. I'm just kind of curious, was there anything on that list that really just jumped out at you and said, oh my gosh, this is going to be impressive?
I haven't had a chance to dive into the list much because my daughter's here. So we're out doing stuff and being a little more active than just studying the Spiel list, which is too bad because I've enjoyed looking at it over the years. So far, I've heard a little bit of chatter here and there, but nothing's really jumping out yet. I'm always astonished that we get, it'll be a couple of thousand games coming out by the time the show hits. And it's just like drinking from a fire hose.
Yeah.
Trying to figure out what's coming down the line that looks really interesting.
Well, and it's interesting too, because I think that with the way, even though the way of the world is still kind of a little discombobulated, I would say that, from a shipping and production standpoint, I think things are kind of getting back on track. I'm seeing less challenges with production schedules, and I'm seeing more issues with prototypes not meeting the standard. So we've talked a lot about the stacking chess set that I backed on Indiegogo that I'm still waiting for. A lot of the challenges that they allegedly had to do with the quality of the products that they were getting. And then I just recently got an update on Lying Pirates, which is a dice game I backed, and they were using bamboo cups, and the bamboo cups did not meet their standard. And so they've gone back to the wheelhouse on that, but they were able to really put together a more realistic schedule for shipping. And I think that post-pandemic and with the shipping that's going on these days, I think we're kind of back into getting to more of a new normal. In most engineering kinds of things, I always tell people you take what people tell you and you make it metric, you double it and add 30.
Yeah. Well, and we had heard that the shipping is getting back to normal prices. Prices are coming back down. But also I was thinking, I got a newsletter from Stonemaier, our friends over there, and that the figures for expeditions don't always fit into the bases. So I was thinking, you were just talking about people getting slightly off prototypes, but it's even production materials too. It seems.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about expeditions a little bit later. I can validate that is happening.
Okay. Well, but if we go back to Germany for a minute, a couple of weeks ago we had the Spiel des Jahres games listed, and so those are always fun to know. And I have to say, like the Spiel des Jahres winner was Dorf Romantique by Lukas Zach and Michael Palm. I guess it's a very popular computer game or online game. I'm not sure.
All I see is Tim Conway is Dorf. I'm sorry.
Yeah, exactly. I know that's what happened to me too. And there's nothing I could do about it.
Yeah.
And it's people think about the Spiel des Jahres like, oh, this is going to be the game of the year. And it's, fairly often an actual German game that, at least in the past, hasn't always made it over to the States.
Right.
So I don't know. I'm still potentially interested. It has a lot of good fans. So, but yeah, that was interesting.
Yeah. I was just going to say, there's a British distributor. The name of it escapes me. It's where I get my copies of Meadow. I'll have to go dig it out and send it over to you. A lot of times. And by the way, you can go to Amazon in Europe and ship to the United States.
Amazon.de. Yep.
That would be it. Yes. And so, so there are some other options to get it. The question is, can you translate?
Yep. That is, well, and frequently you'll see companies will put up multilingual PDFs.
Right.
So they've done the translation themselves, even if it's not necessarily coming to market. This was stuff that I remember in 2008, 2009 on the Geek, there was lots of conversations about pay stubs and who did the recent translations of which or whatever game. And you don't really see that anymore.
Yeah.
Just because the United States, our market for these hobby games has grown enough that they're willing to go ahead and do translations. Whether that translates into actually, if you will, the copies showing up, nah, but it doesn't feel like there's a whole community of who's doing the best translations of rules and who's doing the best translations for pay stubs. So
that's fair.
That's been a nice change.
Yeah. Well, it's really cool. I was looking at I will have a link to that game in the show notes below. people can check it out. Obviously, I think Dorf is Dorf like a German word for golf.
I
don't know. It looks like a golf
have
course.
no
I think
idea.
I should, if only I had a daughter that was fluent in German and I could ask her these
That would
questions.
be awesome. Yeah. Ask her for that. If only.
I'll have to work on that. Okay. Well, she could also help us translate the games.
Yeah. Well, and then so the other two, there was the kids game of the year, the Kinderspiel, and that was Mysterium Kids Captain Echo's Treasure. So Mysterium continues to do well for itself. And then the sort of most interesting one here is the Kennerspiel, which is the sort of enthusiast or connoisseur's game of the year, right? Mm-hmm. And it is called, it's Challengers by Johannes Krenner and Markus Slavschek. And I've looked at it, heard it described as a card battler kind of tournament game.
Okay.
And I think it has a lot of us scratching our heads thinking, this feels kind of light for something that should be a connoisseur's game, right? So I'm interested to see how the Kennerspiel, if they push themselves to be a little more challenging, or if they sort of go towards a kind of Spiel des Jahres plus sort of what they're looking for in their game. So that was an interesting choice for the committee.
Well, I'm curious to see how that impacts for the community. I think that it's all about how the community will experience it and what their overall sense of it is, I guess.
Yep. Yeah. And I think people like the game. It seems like it's kind of a super fun game, but yeah. So we'll see. Yeah, exactly.
Interesting. Well, last time we were together with Kit from Great Game Envy, I had mentioned at that point in time that Origins was going on, and we were waiting while we were doing that podcast to see if any of their awards had been announced. Obviously, it's been a number of weeks since we've been together, and all those awards have been given. So just sort of posthumously, I'm not going to go through them all. I will list them in the show notes below, but I thought there were a couple of things in there that caught my attention. Number one, the retailer game of the year was Boop. Boop, of course, was a game that was first mentioned to us by Megan Connell back when we talked to her in the game Therapy edition of this podcast. And she brought that up as a game that was a great game. And so it was the retailer game of the year. And, of course, the Origins fan favorite, no surprise here, Flamecraft by Lucky Duck Games.
And I have more to say about Flamecraft a little bit later. But for Boop, I can also see why it would be retailer game of the year. It's a game about kittens and cats on a bed where the board is the game box, and it just looks adorable. Like I can see it pretty much selling itself once you say that.
Yeah. And I might have a shrink wrapped copy or two here.
Ah, okay.
Because I have people in my life that like cats.
There you go.
So, and then I'll leave the rest. There wasn't anything else that really jumped out at me other than those two. And I was actually struck by the number of games I didn't know.
Yeah.
That's part of why I was kind of like, when I go through. So just, there was like a board game social, Creature Comforts. There was board game strategy, Planet Unknown. There was board game thematic by Dead Reckoning.
Oh, Dead Reckoning. Yep.
Yeah. And then a card game called Scout.
Scout looks awesome.
And then
I've really wanted to get my hands on that. Yeah.
Okay. And then a children's game called Honk.
Yeah, that I didn't know.
Yeah.
But it sounds cute.
Yeah. And then, of course, collectibles. There was a Magic the Gathering, and I just kind of like...
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, people love that. I also noticed that they have the Hall of Fame inductees, and Martin Wallace. It's like, I can't believe it took this long, but there he is. So...
Yeah, Martin Wallace.
Well
done. Well, a lot of games.
Yes.
You look in the collection. I think I have Nanny Narking. I have Tinner's Trail. I have Struggle of Empires. Great stuff from Martin Wallace.
Brass, yeah. Many, many good things.
Well, I don't have
so that was well deserved.
Yeah, so some neat stuff there to take a look at from that particular standpoint, because I think we're in that place now. Between Origins and then I think Gen Con's coming up. I've been talking to a lot of people that have been getting ready for Gen Con.
Oh, yeah.
And so there'll be more to come on the news and notes front, I think, from those particular events. So, that's some good stuff that's out there. And I'm glad to see that some of these games are getting the attention. And then the games that I don't know, that could just be, a list for me to go check out and see
absolutely.
where it's going to fit into my my design aesthetic or the gaming aesthetic that I like so much.
Yeah, but between that and the Essen list, that'll keep you busy for a while.
Yeah, I still need that translator to stay though. Anyway, moving on. So obviously, it's been a few weeks since we've been together. It's summertime, which of course that means families around and we're all doing other things. And sometimes that can make it a little difficult to get things on the table. But I think both of us have been pretty active in that regard. So why don't we sort of go down our list of what's been on the table, and I'll let you lead us off, please, James.
All right, man. So it's been a little while now, but we got Kalimala to the table. That's a 2017 Fabio Lupiano game. They have a new edition of it, it looks like, with updated artwork. I have the older Stronghold Games edition. Both are quite good. What I like about it, and what's interesting about this game, is it's a really stripped down action selection worker placement game, but with its sight set on area majority competition.
Nice.
So you're these worker, you sort of own the factory, and you're trying to produce cloth in Florence. Yeah. In the, let's say, 18th, 19th century, probably 18th.
It says it says the late Middle Ages, but that's okay.
There you go. Okay. So earlier than that, but it's one of these where, this is a helpful theme, but it could have been a whole bunch of other ones too, but I like the way it works. The worker placement, though, is super interesting. There are 9 action locations, but you play your action disc into the space between 2 actions.
Okay.
And then you do both of them, right? Oh. So in whichever order you want to do. So you can gain resources as well as move resources to the area majority spots. So, but you're always doing at least 2. And you can't block anyone, which is really interesting for an action or for a worker placement game, right?
Sure.
So if you've put your disc down and then someone else wants to play to that space, they can, and then they do their thing. And then every previous placed disc gets activated. So when your disc or the other person's discs. So there's a generosity to the game that feels a bit like Flamecraft. And then the everybody get to go feels sort of like the Puerto Rico, San Juan Race for the Galaxy kind of stuff, right? You pick an action, everybody gets to do it.
Yeah, well, it's also like Earth, which I'll talk about a little bit.
Excellent, yeah.
Looking at this.
So if anybody places a 4th disc in a stack, that triggers some in-game scoring.
Okay.
And that's when you start to track these various area majority contests. So you can plan ahead a little bit to see how, if you want to give up on there's no point in me, sending cloth to London because Laura has way too much. So, but then I see that the next one is going to be, they're going to score one of the castles. So I'll work on putting stuff into the castle. And if you can't do an action, this is another one nice. You get an action card, which then you can play whenever you want to on your turn, whenever one of your discs is activated. So there's lots of interesting flexibility that you can do with interesting chains that you can put together. And then there's a final scoring based on some sort of final scoring cards. And it goes really quick. I mean, you'd think for a game that kind of has this much worker placement, area majority, action selection, there's going to be a lot going on. But it took us less than an hour. And with 1-2-player variant, it took us about 40 minutes. So nice. It goes quick. It was nice.
It's interesting in looking at it and hearing you describe it. My first thought was it reminded me of Taverns of Teffenthal. But I think there's a little bit more going on here. I see, the components kind of look like a Vita Lacerda kind of setup. Mm-hmm. And then there's also this idea of, just the whole worker placement piece that even has a little bit of a Kingsburg element to it. The way that you can do in between and stuff like that. It's kind of interesting the way that you see those things come together in that way. And just while we're kind of on that topic is, as I become a little bit more proficient with the mechanics of gaming, I've been doing it now for, I was actually going through my pictures last night. So I've been back in the hobby since really 2018. And, and we were talking yesterday about how now when a new game comes out, I'm more likely to go straight to the rule book as opposed to trying to find a video, just because the mechanics become familiar and you learn how to use the legalese of the words as to whether you can, do something a certain way. And so it's just, you're becoming proficient with the mechanics that are hard to copyright, but easy to repeat from game to game. So
yes,
so that's kind of that. But no, this looks really interesting, and then of course, knowing the neighborhood you live in, I know what's up next.
Yep. Yeah, we've talked about Sanssouci before, and it was funny. There was one night where this was happening, and Laura wanted to play. She was like, "Let's do something," but I'm feeling kind of beat, so let's play something familiar and light. And then we played it, and at the end, she was like, "You know what?" So, sort of to your point, Joe, she was like, maybe this is a little too light. Maybe I know enough about games now that I can play something that's familiar and light is going to actually be heavier than what I've thought about in the past. So it's, she wanted to have a really good think. So we've talked about familiar games, sort of the bread and butter games, right? Go-to games, things that you want, like, oh, this is a comfort and sit down and do this. That you don't have to take too long to remember the rules. And you can just sit down and go. And Sanssouci is a great game, to be clear, but for us, it's like Wingspan, Quacks of Quedlinburg, Third and Taxis, Jaipur and Genius. So, but I think like Wingspan is the same for you and Dale, right?
Yes, very much so. Wingspan and Parks, those two, and Isle of Cats, because and the games that we really like that, it's either but for what Parks is super easy to get on the table. Yeah, Wingspan and Isle of Cats can be a little bit more cumbersome, but I've organized them in a way that I can get them out very quickly. Nice. The new Wingspan box, the big box, I've got everything separated by their versions. So if you just want to play a base game, because sometimes we like the challenge of the base game because it's harder to get resources and such. And so anyway, definitely like that. And I think it's as you were talking about the Laura's epiphany around maybe I'm looking for something a little deeper and I'm getting more comfortable with games. It's it's a lot like I think about wines and bourbons. When you start those things, your palate is such that it's like, okay, I don't know what's good,
right?
And now you kind of gravitate to, oh, I like this versus this, and I can tell the the quality of the grape or the quality of the distillery by what I'm tasting, and it's very similar in a game by just sort of the satisfaction that you get. And it's interesting because, we talk about, I was going through my BGG and I've got about 200 games here in the house on the shelf, which is an obsessive compulsive problem.
It ramps up quick, doesn't it?
But at the same time, I kind of go through it and go, okay, if I had to part with something, what would I part with and why? And I think about, and I'm going to pick on this game for no reason. I don't hate this game. I like this game. But The Colors of Paris. I mean, it was a great game when it came out. We loved it. We got a lot of satisfaction from it. But I think there are other games that give you that same stimulus and satisfaction that almost becomes unnecessary for the collection. Like I would rather play Artsy, or I would rather play Canvas instead of Colors of Paris. If I want an art-themed game, I'm more interested in those two. And so it makes me wonder, is that something I should put up for sale or trade or whatever, And I think that's an interesting approach or thought about it, because I go through it because, eventually I'm going to run out of room in this room for Kalaxes.
Right.
I've got a plan for expansion that I can go only so far, and I know what the limits are in this room. And I've actually put 4 more Kalaxes in this room in the last month, but in ways that you would not necessarily notice. So because it's just the way I've eliminated other things in the space,
right?
And it's really just kind of neating up the room, but it's also designed to put certain games away and all that stuff. Anyway, I just think it's interesting that as we look at the collection, or eventually I'm going to have to cull something.
Right.
And I've got to find the right kind of venue to do that. But anyway, I don't want to get too far down the path on that. But yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking of when you were talking about. Well, you've definitely got a couple other games here, so let's talk about those. Sorry.
Yeah. So there's a super fun little card game that we started playing when Sky came back down to stay with us.
Yep.
And so it's called 10. And it's all caps, which is kind of hilarious. If you're looking for it on the Geek, it's 10 TEN, all caps. The other one is not the same one. So this is 2021. This is Molly Johnson, Robert Melvin, and Sean Stankovic are the designers. It's this small box, push your luck with an auction mechanism that's just super fun. And what's really great about this is that on your turn, you do one thing, you flip a card from a fat deck. There are numbered suits, there are wilds, and there are currency cards. That's the three kinds of cards in the game. Mm-hmm. The currency cards have numbers like pips on them from 1 to 5. So you're flipping a card if it's one of the numbered suits. If you go above 10 in the numbers, you bust. But the currency cards, if you flip one of those over, they subtract from the number on the number cards. But if you go above 10 in currency cards, you bust. So hence 10 in the title. But whatever you do, if you take either numbers or currency, the other players get some benefit. So everyone is involved in what you're doing. And even if you bust, sometimes they get some stuff. And all you're trying to do is get together runs from 1 to 9 in each. I think there's 4 suits. And you only score the longest run. So if you have 2, 3, 4, that's 3 points. If you have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in another one, that's 2. You count all of that. And that's it. You play through the deck. Most points wins.
Nice.
It has 2 wrinkles that makes the game a little more interesting. Each time a wild comes up, the game kind of stops and you have a once around bid. So when you bust or get those currency cards, that's when you start to spend the money that you've been getting. And at the end of your turn, if you take the suited cards and don't bust, you can buy a card. So it feels like at the very beginning, like you can't put anything together, but then you start getting the money, you start buying these, you start winning an auction or 2. And all of a sudden what looked like, 1, 3, 7, all of a sudden you start to fill in those gaps and like, ooh, now I have a nice run going. So it's easy to teach. You pretty much know how to play it now.
Right.
It takes a round or 2 just because that whole, let's take an auction, let's see how the numbers work with each other. But it goes super quick. It's probably 15, maybe 20 minutes. And it's been a nice one sort of after Emerson goes to bed, before Sky wants to watch something, we'll play a quick round of 10. And yeah. And I think you can still find this in shops all over the place. It's a small enough box if you're taking us to like the beach or you've got family and, it's easy for anybody who likes card games, just kind of get into it a little bit.
Nice. Yeah. Mm-hmm. No, and it's an AEG game, which of course is
that's right.
One of our favorite publishers. We run into them quite a bit.
Yes.
So that's awesome. Yeah, no, it looks interesting. And I think you're right. It's funny, we talk a little bit about this in the sense that, oftentimes we will, when we get a new game, we'll kind of walk through it, to get a sense of, okay, what is this game going to be like? And how do we know that we're doing it right? So a lot of times we won't even keep scoring the first game. We'll kind of walk through a couple of rounds. Yeah. And we did this recently with Expedition. And I'll talk about it when we get there.
Ooh, yeah.
We just kind of went through a few mechanics because it took a minute to just sort of acclimate yourself. Acclimate yourself to it. So I can see that that's a useful thing to do here.
Mm-hmm. And it goes, but it's such a great little, it's 10. You're trying not to go over 10. It's pretty basic,
right?
And everybody. And what I love about this is there are other, like if you're watching somebody play Can't Stop or something, it's just their turn and they're doing their thing and everybody can watch or they can wander away or whatever. But with 10, you want to see what they're doing and kind of keep track because you're like, I think you should take the money this time, because then I'll be able to buy that card that I need next time if I don't bust.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of fun. I have lost badly a couple of times because I kept like, I've got 6. What could possibly go wrong? A 7 could possibly go wrong. So
it would do it. Yeah.
Flips up in 13. Like, damn it. All right. So
yeah.
And it's just a lot of fun. Again, it goes quickly enough. There's this balance between, is there a lot of randomness? Yes. Does it play very quickly? Yes. So that's cool. Yeah. If there's a lot of strategy as well as randomness and it takes a while, I'm like, oh no, that's just a bad mix of things. So this is definitely one that you can just have a lot of time and say, well, the cards hated me, whatever. It was super fun to play.
Awesome. And then of course, the Origins fan favorite.
Yeah, we got that to the table last night. Another fun one. Um, we've talked about it before on the show. Convinced Sky to come in and play, and it was one of those great dramatic moments in gaming when you're behind and it looks like you're 15 points behind, and everybody's like, well, sorry, Dad. And I'm like, yeah, but I have these 5 fancy dragons. Let's see what happens.
Yeah.
And you zoom ahead, and it was hilarious and wonderful to be like, oh, I think I'm dead in the water. I'm dead in the water. No, wait, but I can't tell anybody. Right. So it's a super nice dramatic change. And this time we were within like 8 points of each other at the final tally. So just such a fun, just wonderful little game.
That's awesome. Yeah, it was. It's interesting. We in the game store yesterday. A friend of mine, Grace, was there, and she had her copy, and she was teaching some people the game, and just watching people. It's one of those games that, and the reason it kind of reminds me of Wingspan is that when you have it on the table in a game store, the people who are learning it have this look on their face of just ongoing joy. With Wingspan, it's the bird cards. With Flamecraft, it's just the cuteness of the artwork and just the mechanics of it.
Adorable little beasts, yeah.
But as you're also watching people walk back and forth through the store, and I mean, there was a lot of, there was some Warhammer going on yesterday. There was some Magic going on yesterday. There was a big RPG event in the back room. But as people were walking by, everybody was pausing to look at this game. And I think it's just, there's an attraction to it that, people are just drawn to. And it's all about the artwork, and it's all about the concept, and it's all about the punny humor.
Oh, I was going to say, such good, fun stuff in there too. Yeah.
So it's just kind of interesting because I've been listening to, as you know, I listen to a lot of different podcasts, and
sure.
I was listening to the Grumpy Old Geeks recently, and they were talking about how certain things from our childhood just don't stand up anymore. Sure. Like they had rewatched, like one of the guys was talking about rewatching Caddyshack with his son, and his son kind of going, well, I understand why you think this is funny, Dad, or now I understand some of the jokes that you and Mom talk about all the time,
right.
But this doesn't always speak to my generation. And then that led a question to, I wonder if Monty Python speaks to this generation. And, you see these people out there that will watch Monty Python movies or Mel Brooks movies, and they're reacting to them. And, but there's a lot of punness in those kinds of things. And then to just sort of see that the art form is not dead. It's just perhaps how it's culturally presented. And I personally am a fan of, Monty Python movies and Mel Brooks movies, because I know what his intent was, their intents were behind the content, but it's just curious. It's just interesting to see what has legs and what doesn't, in that regard. So I didn't want to get
and it's, too philosophical. For example, in Flamecraft, one of the stores is Critical Roles.
Yep.
Right. It's the bakery.
Sure.
And,
Draco Bell.
Yeah. Well, I think, yeah. And so we've got both a kind of Taco Bell and Harry Potter thing. Critical Roles, will that age? How long is that show and franchise going to be around? Right.
That's a fair question.
Yeah. The Hobbit Chino, I think, card that came up last night, I think that's going to read well for a while.
Yeah. That'll do okay.
Yeah.
What about the Gnome Depot?
Yeah, see, that was good too.
Yeah.
There's just such funny stuff in there. They've really it just doesn't take itself seriously. And like Kalimala, just to go back a minute there, there's this generosity. If you want stuff, we've got stuff. Here, have some stuff. Mm-hmm. You're never going to be completely blocked out of anything.
Right.
And you can plan into the future. And yet it still makes you think about what you want to do and in what order and how far you're thinking ahead. And then there's a bit of, particularly in Flamecraft, luck of the draw. What card is going to come up when somebody fulfills another enchantment? What fantasy dragon are you going to get? That kind of stuff.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And of course, everybody, like I had the Kickstarter version that came with the dragons that you can paint. Nice. You can now get those aftermarket. And so Grace had hers, and her boyfriend had done the airbrushing to them, and they looked really cool. They looked really nice. And of course, we were in there doing a lot of different painting, so it was just sort of kind of good to everybody show off their artwork a little bit. Well, cool. That sounds like you guys have been pretty busy.
Yeah.
obviously, as I mentioned before, I've had a lot going on. But after we had talked to Jamie Stonemaier and he had put all the emphasis on Earth,
right,
we pulled that out and got that going and played it and really enjoyed it. It has a lot of stuff going on there in the sense that every move you make gives something to somebody else. And so everybody is benefiting from it. And so you can really build up your resources to get to the win scenarios that are there. And so I like that. I can see why Jamie thought it was such a great mechanic. I had gotten it through a Kickstarter, and it had been on my shrink wrap of Wall of Shame for a while. But it was one of those things where once we kind of got it out and started playing, and it was super accessible and just really satisfying. And now that we've got the mechanics down of how to play it, I can get it on the table very quickly because I was able to. Sorry, I'm clearly distracted by something. I'm doing something very poorly here. I should not do this when I'm the one supposed to be talking.
So this is, it looks like is this a tableau builder? Is that part of what's going on here?
Yeah. I mean, you're collecting cards, and the cards you're trying to build a 4x4 tableau. Okay. And the way you build it and the powers of the cards that you're putting out will give you certain advantages as you're going through. And there's some in-game goals that you're striving for. You have some personal goals. You have climate goals. You have flora and fauna goals. And all of those things are kind of unpacking. And so it's very, every game can be different depending upon the cards you get, which is really nice. And we found that this was just a really nice and relaxing game. And then I decided that to where I was going with that when I was distracted because I was looking up something real quick, was that it came with some storage stuff that were kind of like bambooish, woodish kind of things that were kind of meh. Okay. But that was part of the Kickstarter. And I've gotten to this stage where when I get something, I go ahead and just begin to look in printables or Yegi to find if there is a 3D printable option that's better, Right. And I found a really good one for Earth, and I was able to print it and get it out. And what's really nice about it, it's a perfect storage approach that not only packs the box up so that the lid fits perfectly, that's good. But it also gets the game on the board on the table really fast because it's got everything organized and you're ready to go. And I love that about that. Now, what I ran into was I learned, we talk, the bug Zen and the art of motorcycle maintenance. I learned Zen and the art of 3D printer maintenance. As I was printing this insert, I had a clogged nozzle, and I fixed the clogged. So I replaced the nozzle. I got it all out, and I put the new nozzle in, and I had loosened the hot end too much. Which, you know what it's like when you have water going through a pipe, but the water leaks out of the pipe before it gets to the faucet. That was going on inside my printer, and I was getting a really bad situation. So I had to go to the art of Google to learn what I was doing was a very common situation. I was able to get the replacement nozzle pieces that I needed, and I got a replacement hot end, and I was able to fix it and get everything back on track. But it was just a real learning experience, as I'm still relatively new to 3D printing, and I use it largely for gaming. So Earth was my big introduction to that. And but anyway, we loved the game. The game was really great. I look forward to getting it out on the table again, and we want to get it to the game store and get it out on the table. And like I said, it's one that we can get out easily and pull back in and just really enjoy the aesthetic of it. And I think that's also part of it, is that there's an aesthetic to it, because as you're getting your cards out, you also get points for growth, and so you're building treetops. It's a lot like like Canopy in that way. So they've got some really nice nicks and knacks that come with it that lets you build it up. And so they've done a really nice job with the design and just the overall thing. And I think that it really helps you appreciate the thought that went into that. The other thing I was adding in the background, because I completely forgot, was in between Earth is we also did Rebuilding Seattle. And I don't believe we talked about that last time.
No, we did not. You had just, I think, we had gotten a copy?
No, we've had it for a while, and it was going to be the one I pulled out before Jamie said do Earth. And so we moved over to Rebuilding Seattle, and this is, you're in Seattle post the fire. You are looking to literally rebuild the neighborhoods, and you're trying to get to this end game kind of scenario, and it's really frustrating because you start out with a population of 11, but every
small neighborhood, sure.
But every round the population grows by 12.
Oh,
and you have 3 markers that give you benefits, but if your benefit is behind your population, you subtract the benefits, and so there's some instances where you get 0 benefit. And so it's very counterintuitive because what you're really finding is you want to minimize your population growth and maximize the amenities. And so it's very counterintuitive because you're thinking of, I want to move up on the scoreboard, but you have one meeple that you really want moving down on the scoreboard.
Right.
And just when you think you've got yourself set up, a new round pops up and you jump ahead 12. So if you don't minimize your population out front, you don't get it's harder to catch up. And I think that once I kind of got that.
Who is this? Who's the designer of
this?
It's
the publisher's WizKids.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, which, I think I said at the time when I first got it, I was really surprised. Because I just don't think of them in this way. And that's, perhaps some arrogance on my part, and apologies to the folks at WizKids for that. But the designer is a guy named, Quinn Brander.
Okay.
So it's 1 to 5 players. It's a pretty easy game to learn. We've had a really good time with it. The different, you can start with different neighborhoods, and different neighborhoods give you different powers. Or different goals, and it's really well thought out. I mean, when I first saw it, I saw somebody reviewing it on YouTube, and I thought, that's interesting. I should buy that game. And so I ordered it. I ordered it through the game store, and it took a while for it to kind of really get out into the public. I got it, and I just started keeping it on the shelf of shame and kept moving it over. And so we finally got it out, and that was one of those where it was just quick, very accessible. Great to get on the table. A lot of fun with it. I also printed out some organizers for it, so that made it easier to put it away. Yeah. So that's also good. Happy about that. So Rebuilding Seattle. That's been that's a great game. I highly recommend it because it's also historically accurate. I mean, there was a fire in Seattle, and a lot of what modern Seattle is built on is the remnants of that fire. So it's very much a phoenix from the fire kind of story historically, and I think this game sort of reflects that. Other than the fact that you're also building an airport, which I don't think they had at the time of the fire, but anyway, there are some great landmark tiles in there. Oh, and it's a polyomino thing, which is nice because it's got that Isle of Cats. These are the consistent shapes that you're working with, and then by the way, here are these Oshak type of shapes that are really going to give you a benefit in different ways. And some of the benefits are at the end game. Some of the benefits are ongoing once you get them. And it's just really, really a nice game. Highly recommend it.
Yeah, it feels a little Stefan Feldy in the, you have to manage the bad thing that is always chasing you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. No, that looks awesome.
Very much so. And then, of course,
I was going to say, the next thing I see on this list here is pretty exciting.
Yeah. So last Saturday, a box showed up on my doorstep, and it was Expeditions the Ironclad edition, which means the metal mechs. It's considered a sequel to Scythe, not an expansion to Scythe. We got it out on the table this week. We've played it a couple of times.
Nice.
Really, really like the game. And it kind of reminds me, we've been talking about this, so there's playing games that Jamie has designed versus games that Jamie has published. You really find Jamie's style. There's a lot of asymmetry in Jamie's style. So when you're playing something like Tapestry or Expeditions, you feel that, because just like I said with Rebuilding Seattle, each card you have and each of the character and their familiar or their companion you have give you certain abilities that are unique to you.
Nice.
And so it kind of reminds me of Tapestry a little bit.
Okay.
It also reminds me of Lost Ruins of Arnak, because there are certain map pieces that are covered that you have to go to, and you get a map token, and then you flip it over, and then you have to put some corruption on that. You don't have the penalties of not getting the corruption off like you do in Lost Ruins of Arnak, but there is this whole idea of how are you going to get the benefit of this? And you can always, and the way the mechanic is set up is you can do usually one thing, three things, or two things. So you start off with your meeple in a refresh mode, and you move it to the middle, and you can move, play, or gather in any order that you want.
All right.
That's your first move. So you typically move to somewhere on the map. You move, and then you either, if you have a card in your hand, you're going to play that card to either enhance your power or your guile. And then you're going to gather whatever on there. So you can gather resources, you can gather workers, things that are going to make it easier for you to win the game. Because what you're trying to do is you have this mech that you're basically traveling around Siberia on. There is a corruption going on there because of some meteorites that have fallen. And you have the ability to find things that allow you to upgrade your mech. You find meteorites that give you more power that you can put onto your mechs. And then you also solve some quests that give you some in-game benefits. All of these things are leading to the end game. And you have 4 stars, and when you meet at least 4 of the criteria on the overall board home base, you trigger the end of the game. And you win the game by being the richest person at the end. And it's all about the money. And you use the same Scythe money that you would use for Scythe. And so, in fact, it's interesting. I as we've talked about before, I have a Game Toppers table. And with the last Kickstarter where I got the leg so I could keep the table up all the time and not have to put it on a table, I also got an accessory bank that I just realized is perfectly suited for this game.
Oh, that's awesome.
It fits all the bits, the monies and everything. So you can put it on a turntable, have it in the middle of the room. I'm going to put a picture up on the show notes you can see how I've done it.
Is this the picture I'm looking at right now, as a matter of fact?
Yeah. So you see the round thing. It's got the money organized. You got the cards in there. You got
that's pretty slick.
All of the pieces, and it's just really great for a game like this where you've got a lot of things that you need to work with. But because it's a tableau, I mean, you're building out this big map,
right?
You're really taking up a lot of table space. And I mean, what Dale and
I was wondering about that, because those hexagonal tiles look pretty chunky.
Yeah. So what we do is so Dale and I have our table set up as a rectangle, not a square. So it's set up in 72 by 48 mode. And so we both sit on one end of the table, and we build the tableau diagonally into the table. And then she'll put her mat on her left side, and I'll put my mat on my right side. And then we keep the turntable in the center so we can both access the resources. And we find ourselves doing this with a lot of games.
That makes sense.
Lost Ruins of Arnak, we both sit on one side of the table and we fill out the whole table.
In Last Supper style.
Yeah, exactly. Very much so. Great analogy.
Thank you.
So yeah.
That was better than if you only have one, you should have 2 turntables, because that would be What you watch? Yeah,
I do have 2 turntables, as you can see there in that picture,
and a microphone. So that's awesome.
Yeah, the second turntable there is so the little round one is the one we travel with.
Okay,
but I've also discovered it's a great thing to put my accessory bank on. The big one is
beautiful.
The one we use when we're playing in the and we need the game on the tableau. So when we play, for example, that bigger turntable, or Mary Susan, Lazy Susan, I guess we would say, is we can actually put the Rebuilding Seattle board up there and do all the cards on that table and kind of give us a little bit more room and ability to share and stuff. What you don't also see on this table is the magnifying glasses that we keep off that we can use to read the cards because we're old.
Yes.
Which is a big part of our gameplay, unfortunately.
I have relied on the magnifying in my phone, which then I can also add a flashlight to, so it gets that's beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway,
gaming above 50. Yeah.
Yeah. So a lot on the table, not as much as normal given the amount of time we've been away, but just enough here for us to get some things that were shrink wrapped out and try some new things. We did also get our copy of Race to the Raft from City of Kings, Frank West, the Isle of Cats final game.
Oh, okay.
It is still shrink wrapped. It is going to get on the table eventually.
These things happen.
But Expeditions was one. And it was interesting. I will say this. So a couple things about the Expeditions. Number one, every time Dale and I play a game, because we're in the room that had been, we had it set up as our home theater back in the day. Big TV, had a couch out here. We took the couch out, put the game table in. Now we use it largely for gaming. But we still have the big TV in the room with an Apple TV connected to it. So we'll bring up YouTube and we'll always play something on the screen that is thematic to whatever we're playing.
Oh, that's super fun.
So if we're playing Earth, we'll find like a video, like a Zen video that's just like a bunch of nature scenes and it just plays in the background. There's music playing and it's just a nice kind of background aesthetic.
That's awesome.
There are some people out on YouTube that are actually publishing soundtracks for certain games. So
I have heard about this. Okay.
So there's one for Scythe that it's about 2 hours worth of content and they have graphics from the game Scythe. So you see like Olga and Gunter and all these different characters. And so we've been playing that while we've been playing Expeditions and it's just been really nice because it's very, appropriate for the feel of what you're doing. And so, we've really enjoyed, kind of having that as part of our experience. We've been doing that for a while. I mean, when we play Wingspan, we'll have birds up. And actually, it was funny. We actually started this tradition back when Kohaku came out, the tile laying game about koi pond. And we found these videos of koi that was just like a koi pond in the background.
Sweet.
And so we would just sit there and let the koi go while we're playing Kohaku. And so that's just sort of been where we started the tradition. And, when we play parks, we'll find music of the national parks.
Okay.
And so it's just a fun way to kind of make the game.
I would think for parks, it would just have I've Been Everywhere playing on loop.
That would drive me crazy.
It's not that long song.
I will tell you this. When we played Disney's Jungle Cruise board game, there is a channel that is basically the music that you would hear in the queue of the Jungle Cruise, and we play that when we play the Jungle Cruise game. So, which
is music that's been engineered not to annoy you. So that's good.
Allegedly, yeah. But a lot of these traditions, it really came out of the fact that we were gaming through the pandemic, and it was just the two of us, and we needed that sense of community. And so, anyway, that's kind of where we were. So I know we're getting a little time constrained, so I want to move us along to kind of what's going on in the world of Kickstarters or game founds that we have backed or intrigued by or finally shown up. And I think you've got something.
I do. Old Gods of Appalachia role-playing game, which is a RPG that is built on the Cypher system. So it's not exactly a D20 system, although D20 is what you generally use. But it's also built out of a podcast called Old Gods of Appalachia. And So it's a sort of 1920s Mind Wars meets Cthulhu sort of vibe.
Nice.
And set up in a kind of mashed and redistributed Appalachia, so that, as they say in the books, some towns are in the different states and some counties have moved north or south of other ones. And so they've, just so you don't feel like you're writing about Hazard, or you're writing about Morgantown, or you're writing about Mannington, West Virginia, or something. Right. Yeah. But it pulls on a bunch of the Appalachian region is rich with folklore, and so it pulls on a bunch of that. It's also a diverse region, and so there's a bunch of different traditions there that also get pulled on. It's super interesting. I was very pleased because one of the first things they say in the book is, if you think that you're going to be able to sit down with this game and make fun of Appalachians, you need to find something else to do. I was like, thank you. So that was super awesome.
Yeah.
I didn't want to go all in for it. So I got the PDFs that have arrived, and then they had a stretch goal that was metal coins, company script that you could get sent to you.
Oh, nice.
And I thought, I'm just getting the PDFs. But no, I got a little email that said, hey, send us your address and we will send you the coins. So I'll look forward to the coins. But I'm just really interested in learning a little bit about the cipher system as well. It is the thing that sticks out to me about it just off the top is that the DM never rolls. It's only the players.
Interesting.
So if you're in a combat situation, the DM doesn't roll to attack, you roll to defend. So it's all the dice are in front of the players and not the game master.
Sounds like something you should be demoing at Mythicon.
Yeah, I don't know. I'll have to dig into this and see, but it's since I'll have to see kind of how the system works a little more in play, maybe find some videos to kind of walk me through it a little bit. I'm pretty excited about it.
We'll have a link to Monty Cook Games into the show notes, and you can get there is a free preview that you can download, and you can pre-order the books or the PDF as well. So we'll add that in there.
I think all of the hard copies are being distributed now. So they're good to go.
Cool. So I'm going to, just in the interest of time, I'll kind of walk through some of the Kickstarters that I have backed recently. I had this on my list of interest, Inventions, Evolution of Ideas by Vital Lacerda. I couldn't resist. I had to go ahead and do that. So I did back that, and I'm very excited for that because it kind of reminds me of there was a publisher back in the day, an author. His last name, I can't remember exactly what his last name was. I want to say it was Bloom, but he talked about the creators and the inventors, and it was a lot about that. I'll have to dig that out and see if I can find the book, and then I'll talk about it next time. But this kind of reminded me of that, so I was really intrigued by that. And plus, I'm really intrigued by Vital Lacerda and his just complex gameplay, and just sort of where it can take you. So I'm very excited about that. I also pulled the trigger on Fairies.
Okay, that is a gorgeous looking game, man.
Yeah, and I'm just hoping I didn't get sucked into the artwork,
No, I actually thought it looked like a really solid game in there as well. I like the sort of building stuff that you're doing and looked really interesting. So I think it's going to be a fun game.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I think, I love the idea of it. We listened to a podcast last summer that was called The Rise and Fall of Mars Hill, which was all about that was done by Christianity Today. That was the rise and fall of this mega church in the Seattle area.
Oh yeah. Okay.
And one of the episodes talked about that time frame in the 20s where those girls allegedly saw the fairies and just sort of the hubbub that it caused in England at the time, and just sort of what the truth was out of it. And so it was relevant to the story. But when I saw this, I kept thinking about that story. And the more I kind of dug into it, I was like, yeah, this kind of speaks to me on a lot of different levels. So I was very intrigued by that. And plus, both of my girls are Girl Scout Gold Award winners, and they went to this Girl Scout camp up near Lake Lure, North Carolina, growing up. And one of the things that they always had in the Girl Scout camp was like a fairy village. that
Nice.
the counselors would always keep alive, and the girls would go by and see, are the fairies out today? So, fairies have always been sort of this kind of thing for us. And so I thought that kind of spoke to us as well.
That's adorable. Yeah, man.
Yeah. And then a few last minute additions, occasionally the algorithm gets you, and Nestlings looked pretty intriguing to me by Tangerine Games.
You can add that to your whole mega game of birds, cats, parks. Yeah,
exactly. So that got my attention, and it got my attention for a couple of reasons. Number one, it wasn't an expensive get into, and I've noticed that. Some of these games that have been coming out, they have a base edition, they have a bit of a deluxe edition that's not a steep climb with some good stretch goals. And I think that's another thing about us being post-pandemic, that it's easier to add some of those things without going super nuts. And I think Nestlings kind of fit that bill, and it just was one of those things that kind of intrigued me. And then the last one here is Hamlet by the Lake, which is an expansion to Hamlet, which I didn't have. So I got the version that gets you both of the games. That just looked like a really, again, my aesthetic kind of game. It kind of looked a little bit like what I enjoy about Fjords and some of the other games that kind of have that similar, you're building out your tableau, but there are also some other elements to it. So that is out there, and I believe that is still available to pledge against. Should be closing soon. Well, 42 hours to go. I probably won't have this podcast out in time. So, but as always, I think everybody knows you can late pledge these things.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
They're always happy to take your money.
Yep. And speaking of algorithms sending things your way, Richard Breeze has a new game, The Glade, that's on Kickstarter itself, that looks really intriguing in terms of building patterns and filling in patterns a little bit. I have a couple of his key games, and so I was like, I'm always interested in he used to do R&D games, but now this one. So, and it looks, kind of a mellow out there in the woods sort of thing, but looks like some very basic gameplay of drawing tiles, putting them out in particular patterns, like they say like crossword or Scrabble or something. But the way they come out then lets you do other things. And I think the way that you're going to have to connect all this stuff is going to take a very basic gameplay and add a whole lot of strategy to it. That's going to feel like it's organically building out of the people who are at the table. So that looks really interesting.
Actually, this was the game that you could pick up at Spiel.
Ah, okay.
Yeah. I looked at because I looked at this when you put it in, and I noticed that number one, it's already closed, so we'll have to wait for a late pledge on this. Yeah. So it ended up.
But if you pre-ordered and you're going to Spiel, we'll be there for you.
Well, only 61 people out of 100 did.
Ooh.
Which, that probably fits.
Oh, well,
That probably fits.
That's 60% of the people are going to Essen, and the rest of them are, too busy and got jobs.
In the Venn diagram of I want this game and I'm going to Essen, well, there were 61 people. So there you go.
Yeah. Makes sense.
Picked up is kind of a weird way to look at this. There was a game called Pendragon by GMT Games. I don't even know how this ended up on my radar, but it did. And it's actually not in print at the moment, but I was able to find somebody on eBay that had it at a very fair market price that had never been opened.
Wow.
So I should have it this week. And it's, I've just always loved I was a history major. I've always loved their Arthurian legend. And this is sort of the historical accurate portion of that legend. And it just looked very intriguing to me. And I was like, you know what? I'm down for this. I'm going to pick this game up. So more to come on that. I don't know if it's the kind of game I can get Dale to play with me. But I think it'll be fun to play.
Well, it looks like it's listed under solitaire, and I don't know if that's just an option, or if it's actually and it's a coin game, so that's going to be interesting too. I've not had a chance to play a coin game, so
me neither. I'm kind of going into this with it's kind of like the idea of how you expand your horizons by trying new games. It's like if I had tried to start this hobby, well, I think it's true. I mean, tried to get into this hobby with Root as the gateway game, and Root is a great game, but it's not necessarily a great gateway game.
No, it's not
And I think that, Wingspan was a much more accessible approach to us. And now going back to revisit a Root or to try a Vital Lacerda game is a little bit more accessible because you've got the right kind of muscle memory for it.
Yep.
But
you've got the literacy. Yes.
Yeah. So we'll see if this translates, and if not, I can eBay it back out.
Yeah.
It's
very cool.
I gotta get used to that. I don't need to be such a completionist anymore. Maybe not.
It's quite the dramatic horse there on the cover too.
Yeah, so. I thought it was a pretty good thing. Last thing from my point of view, I just kind of ran across this week. I know we talk about board games. And I think one of the reasons we like board games, particularly for our generation, is that it's an analog thing. We're not playing games. ChatGPT is not embedded in Wingspan yet.
No.
But I mean, it's very analog. It's very community driven. And there is a downloadable book that I ran across recently called 50 Years of Text Games. These are not board games, but these kind of take you back to the day of when adventure games were new on computers, things like Zork, Hitchhiker's Guide, and just stuff like that, where you were really in a theater of the mind by yourself sort of thing. And I just thought that was kind of interesting because, we've gotten so digital. We've gotten so the experience. And it's kind of like what Megan was talking about when we were talking about game theory, that there's certain games that you just have to go and fight the dragon, to move the story forward. And some of these things still have that more of a theater of the mind kind of component. So I'm just going to throw that in the show notes. It might be interesting to some of you of a certain age, and it may not for others, but I just thought it was intriguing. So I thought I would throw it in there.
Interesting stuff. Yeah.
Well, James, that's all I have this week. A good conversation.
All I got too, man.
Yeah. So thank you, everybody, for joining us on this edition of Lay It on the Table. As usual, you can find all of our shows at layitonthetable.show, our website. From there, you can pick your favorite place to listen to us on a podcast. And if one of those places happens to be a place like, Apple Podcasts, please leave us a like and maybe a nice comment, even if it's a comment telling me what I got wrong. I'm happy to take your constructive criticism. Please make it constructive. We are also available as a guild on Board Game Geek, where you will also find that we have a page there as well. And then lastly, you can find the video version of this particular podcast as well as other productions at Geek and Southern on the YouTube channel. Link to all of those things in the show notes below. And as always, I am Joe Mahaffey, and I am not bored. I am board gaming.
And I am James Engelhardt. I hope that all your tiebreakers break your way.
Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time.
1, 2,
Bye.
3, 4.